We're we're starting with a quick revision of what we stopped at last week. Last week we were working on reflex actions. So a reflex action is something that you would start with a stimulus, right? So like in this case, this dog has stepped on a pin, right? And as it steps on the pin, obviously this is like danger. So that dog has to react to this. How does it all start? It starts with some pain receptor down in its foot. That pain receptor would stimulate the nearby sensory neuron. See that sensory neuron here, right here, that would be stimulated. So that will carry an impulse all the way to the central nervous system. This part of the central nervous system in this case is the spinal cord. Reason because it's closer to where the stimulus has happened, right? So we're going to take it to the spinal cord. Right there in the spinal cord, we have what we call a relay neuron. So that's shown here in purple. That's a relay neuron. And then from there, we would take that impulse to a motor neuron. This will take it to an effector. See, the motor neuron starts from the spinal cord, takes it to the muscles here in the leg, and then we'll have a response. Then we will have the proper response to protect the dog from the danger, right? So just like show you here, I'm going to start with the receptor, which is A, then the sensory, which is B. Following this, I'll go to the CNS, right? And within the CNS, we have the relay. The relay will transmit the impulse to the motor, E, and from there, we'll take it to an effector. Note that the relative position here of the cell body is quite important to us. You need to know like what the shape of the neuron is like the sensory looks like this, the motor looks like that, and the relay looks like this, right? And you need to know where exactly the cell body of the neuron is located. Like for the sensory neuron, it's located outside the CNS. And for the motor, it's located in the CNS, and so is the relay neuron. And also note that the sensory neuron is the one to transmit the impulse from the receptor to the CNS, and the motor's job is to carry the impulse from the CNS all the way to an effector, muscle or a gland, right? So that's like quick revision of what we've done last week about reflexes, right? Now let's try something. Let's try to put the events of a response, like a reflex action. Let's try to put them in the correct order. I want you to send me what you think is the correct order of the events in one message. So send me one message with the correct order of events, like start with B, C, D, A, and so on. I'm just gonna give you a couple of minutes. So look what I'm starting with. I'll start with F. I'm gonna start actually with receptor, which is F, yeah. And then I'm gonna go to D, sensory. Then I'll go all the way to E. Then the sensory carries the impulses to a neuron, D. Following this, I'll take the signal from relay to motor. And then finally, I'll take the signal to a effector. And finally, we'll get the muscle response, right? Is this clear? Let's try a question. Here it says what? Here it says like name 3 sense organs and connect them with the correct stimulus. Right? So I can just name any random sense organ. For instance, I'm gonna name the eyes, right? Here for the stimulus, I have to refer to sort of energy that the eyes would detect. So obviously with the eye, it's gonna be what? It's gonna be light. So light energy. If I am talking here about the nose or the tongue, it's gonna be what sort of energy? It's gonna be chemical. If I am talking about, let's say, skin, then you have like wide variety of options to write for, right? Pressure, heat, right? So all these are acceptable. Then they said like what's meant by the term involuntary action. So what does, again, involuntary is just like another word of saying a reflex, okay? So an involuntary action is those actions you do without thinking. Like what? For instance, you can say coughing, sneezing, breathing, blinking. All these don't involve the brain, don't involve thinking, so they are known as reflex. Okay. Here they gave me a picture of someone who has put his hand here on some hot object, and apparently he is gonna pull his arm away. They show me all the events to the reflex action here, right? So I can see there is the sensory here, right? There is relay here in blue, and there is like motor neuron. You see where it is? That's in purple. So these are like the cell body, makes it easy to identify. Anyways, they labeled them for us, so no problem. And they wanted us here to say, explain how parts of reflex arc bring about the response. Okay, so again, how are these parts bring about the response? So first of all, I'll start with the very first thing. Remember what the one we've just done here? So I'm going to start with receptor, detects, and then generates an electric. You know what we call those messages that run along your nervous system? We call them impulses, which travels where? So I'm going to go like receptor, sensory, right? And then to the spinal cord, okay? Shown in the diagram is the spinal cord. Then I'll take it to the next neuron in order. So what's the next neuron after the sensory? We have relay. And follow the relay, I'll have the motor, right? Following this, you're going to end up with that effector. So this is going to refer to the effector shown in the diagram. I have like the muscle here shown, so that's where I'm going to refer to, okay? So that's how we would write that answer regarding the reflex actions. They said describe advantage of simple reflex. What these reflexes are good at, like why reflexes are very helpful for living organisms. Now, usually this is meant to be automatic. They are quick and protective. So these are like three properties of all reflex actions. So again, they're quick and they're meant to protect your body from any possible damage. All right, is this clear? So this was all the nervous system part. We have another section here related to the eye. So the remaining part of the lesson, it will be dedicated to study of the eye. Before this, let me just try with you a couple of questions. So based on what we have seen, can you identify this particular neuron? So by means of its shape, you could just tell me what you think is the correct name of that neuron. All right, now based on that shape, you have the cell body at the beginning. If the cell body is like this, then that is motor. If the cell body is like in the middle, then that's relay. If the cell body is like on a side branch like this, then it's sensory, right? So mine here is definitely a motor neuron, okay? Can we try another question? Here they wanted you to put those events in their correct order. So you could try this as well. Now, based on what I have here, it's gonna be C. Reason, you start with a receptor, sensory, and then a motor neuron. All right, now let's shift to the other part of the lesson. We're gonna talk now about like, why is it that every time I draw like a diagram of neurons, if you noticed, I always like leave gaps. See, there's a gap, there's a gap. These neurons never touch one another. Now, this has to do with what? This has to do with the fact that your neurons are meant not to connect, because if they connect, then that will lead to what? That would lead to the impulse running in both directions. So just like a picture from your brain, you notice like every time we have neurons in your brain or anywhere in your body, there's always something like a gap. See that space here I have? This gap is what we call the synapse. And those synapses are essential because if the neurons are like wires, they touch, then you would find the impulse running in either way. And you don't want this to happen. So that's why we always end up with these synapses, or simply we call them like a junction or a gap. So again, how you define a synapse? Synapse is a junction. it ensures that the impulse runs in one direction. So again, it's made up of two neurons, one neuron before the synapse. What I'm going to call the neuron before the synapse, I'm going to call that the presynaptic or presynapse. And the one after the synapse, I'm just going to simply call it the postsynapse, right? So one more time, here's like a view of the synapse, right? Where do I see that neuron here on the left? I'm going to call it presynaptic neuron, okay? Before the synapse. And that one here, I'm going to call it postsynaptic neuron, okay? And my job now to show you how will the new impulse go from the first neuron to the next one. So let's take a look inside. As I get to the axon of the presynaptic neuron, what do I see? I see that there are some vesicles. You see that vesicle here? Vesicles just like a cell organelle with a membrane that contains some chemical. In my case, the chemical name here, that chemical that I see here, we call it neurotransmitter. What's a neurotransmitter? Just like a chemical to transmit or to carry or to like move that impulse from the presynaptic neuron here to the postsynaptic neuron, right? So again, you see how these vesicles fuse their content, they eject like content like outside, and they move across the synapse. What am I going to call this movement here? This movement, we're simply going to call it diffusion, that those diffuse from one place to another, and they bind to the postsynaptic neuron, right? You notice that the postsynaptic neuron has some receptor to bind to those neurotransmitters. So one more time, always, your presynaptic neuron comes with vesicles. Those vesicles release their content. What the name of the content, what the name of that chemical we have here, we call it neurotransmitter. Those neurotransmitters travel from the presynaptic to the postsynaptic by means of diffusion. They bind to some receptor here. That receptor is only found in the postsynaptic neuron, and that will generate an electric impulse, okay? Let's see this one more time. So again, what would be the very first event in like the synapse? First thing that happens is that the impulse arrives to the presynaptic neuron, right? See, that's the presynaptic neuron on top of your screen. And these are like what? Those packages. These are like vesicles. So those are the vesicles, right? That's the presynaptic. Let's call it presynaptic here. And the gap, you see that empty space here? That's the actual, we call it cleft or synaptic cleft, or just called like a gap between the two neurons. What will these vesicles do? They will fuse and release their content. What am I calling this content? Once again, that content here, we call it the neurotransmitter, okay? That's a neurotransmitter. This is going to be released, and then it would diffuse, and then it binds here, right on the postsynaptic neuron. I got some receptors. They bind to it, and that will cause an impulse to start in the new neuron. So again, originally I had the impulse in the first presynaptic, but now the impulse is running in the postsynaptic neuron, okay? So one more time, I have some electric impulse in the presynaptic. I have some vesicle here. It fuses with the membrane, releases the neurotransmitter. The neurotransmitter then diffuses here in that section and binds to the receptors, and that will cause the impulse now to run in the postsynaptic neuron, right? Is this clear? Let's try something. Let's try to match each one of those labels with the part of the synapse, okay? So I'm going to call that part here, and you guys need to tell me in the chat box what letter am I referring to. So again, my first label here is the vesicle. You need to tell me which label on the diagram is referring to a vesicle. Yeah, Abdurrahman, what do you think?
A, mitochondria.
Yeah, I'm trying to label the vesicle now. So A is mitochondria, right? And D is a vesicle, right? Now it's the receptor. So can you find where would the receptor be? Which letter is the receptor? The receptor is shown here as F, right? Postsynaptic is always the neuron that comes after the synapse. So that would be what? That would be letter G, and presynaptic is E. Finally, the gap thing here is known as the synaptic cleft. Right? Is it clear? Now, I want you to try something else. I want to try like what would be the correct order of events in terms of the diagrams first. So take a look at the diagrams and try to figure out like what would be the correct order of events from those diagrams, and then we match them with the correct text. So how are these diagrams? How can you arrange these diagrams to be in their correct order? I think they are in the right order. Sorry. Yeah, they are in the right order. There's nothing to do here. But then I need to match them as they are. So a neurotransmitter diffuses across the synapse. This would be what? This would be letter Y, right? Okay. I have another one here. Neurotransmitter binds to receptor. That would be what? Which letter?
Z.
The Z. Very good. And the last one here is going to be X. Okay. Now, can you try, just like what we did with reflex, can you try to put those in their correct order? So again, we're trying to do what here? We're going to try to find the correct events about the synapse. So try to send one message with the correct order of events. So look what I'm going to start with. I'm going to start with B, right? That's like before the synapse, right? B. And then I'm going to shift to vesicles, D. And following that, they will release their content, which is E. As they release their content, they will diffuse that neurotransmitter, right? The neurotransmitter binds, and there's a new impulse, right? So that's like the best order. Is it clear? All right. I want to try to figure out if these statements true or false. Let's try the first one. First one says CNS is composed of the brain and spinal cord. Is this correct or incorrect? Is it true or false? Now, it's pretty clear that the only parts of the central nervous system, when we took this, the very first part of this lesson, it was the brain and the spinal cord, right? So these two here is your central nervous system. So that's like definitely true. Okay. But what about the second one? It says sense organs like eye contain receptor cells. This should be what? This should be like true, right? Because a sense organ, what's the definition of a sense organ? A sense organ is like the part of the body that contains receptors, high number of receptors in one part of the body. Then we call that a sense organ. Okay, that's another true. Sensory neurons carries impulses from receptors to motor. So we're going from receptor to motor. This is not like sounding very correct, right? Because there should be some neuron in the middle. So it's going to be receptor, then relay, and after that we will have the motor, right? So that's not true. Reflex actions are quick and projective, right? Does that sound true or false? This is actually true, right? Because that's what a reflex action is all about. Is about doing a quick action to protect you from any possible danger. Then they said the entire relay is inside the CNS. So the relay neuron is found all together inside their spinal cord or inside your brain. Again, it's true. Lastly, electrochemical signals flow across the nervous system, right? Can you think about the last one? Is this true or false, the last statement here? Now, electro stands for what? Electro stands for the impulse, right? Electro is the actual electrical impulse. What about the chemical part? The chemical stands for what? Chemical stands for the neurotransmitter, right? So that's true, right? Therefore, it is true. Okay. Is there any question about these? So can you try yourselves this question? So tell me what you think is correct answer to this question. Great. The best order, the only correct answer here is going to be like this. It's going to be answer C. You know why? Because you're going to start with what? You're going to start with the vesicles. Where are the vesicles? Always found in the presynaptic. Then they go to the neurotransmitter being released. P, because of the diffusion. Finally, Q with the receptors. All right, is that clear? This question is quite tricky, so read it well before you decide what you think is the correct answer. Can you try this? Again, read it well because it's a little bit tricky. Now, let's take a look. It says, which direction does the neurotransmitter passes? Okay, so where am I going to try it? I just need to find P to Q. P to Q is like what? P to Q is motor to relay, right? Motor to relay doesn't make sense, right? So again, you can't be going motor to relay. It should be relay to motor, right? So I'm just going to eliminate the first option. Then it says P to Q again. That's motor to sensory, still wrong, because again, it should be sensory to relay or relay to motor. Again, the only correct order is going to be sensory to relay to motor, right? Then C says what? Says Q to P, which again, still wrong, right? Because you can't be going motor to relay. The only correct option here is D, okay? Because it's like the correct sequence. That's the only correct sequence of events or correct sequence of neurons that we have in the nervous system, right? Does that make sense? Right. Let's try like a question about the reflex actions. Oh, sorry, the what do you call it? The synapse. They said here, describe how impulses are transmitted across a synapse. So what am I going to start with? I'm going to say vesicles containing, do you know what we call that chemical here? It's written actually here in the question. So say vesicles containing the neurotransmitter move to the membrane. What do? They actually fuse with it, right? They fuse with the membrane. As they fuse with the membrane, they release some chemical. We call that chemical, we call neurotransmitter. How does it cross the cleft, or how does it cross the synapse? It crosses it by means of diffusion. Neurotransmitter then binds to some receptors found in the postsynaptic neuron. And this causes what? This causes like a new impulse in the postsynaptic neuron, right? Is that clear? Next one says, suggest how structure of the synapse ensures that the impulse travels in one direction. So again, what am I supposed to write that is only found in the synaptic or presynaptic? And what am I supposed to find to be written in the post-synaptic? Can you figure out like what are these two words here in the presynaptic and the postsynaptic? So it's something unique you'd only find in the presynaptic and something unique you would only find in the postsynaptic. Could you please tell us? Yes.
Vesicles and receptors.
Yeah. So vesicles in the presynaptic, good, and
Receptors.
Receptors. Very good. Awesome. Right. So this will take us now to the part about the eye. So eye is a very good example of like one of sense organs, right? What makes the eye special is because it's highly adapted to move. You see all these muscles around your eye. So you have like a muscle here on the left. There's a muscle there on the right. There's a muscle on the top, the muscle at the bottom. And these muscles allow the eye to change its position. Plus, if you can see here, that the eye comes with like an opening. See that opening in the center? This opening is what I call the pupil. So that's here. That's what I call a pupil. The pupil is surrounded by a bunch of muscles. You see those muscles here shown in blue? These muscles are what I call the iris muscles. Those iris muscles would allow the pupil to get smaller, bigger, depending on what you are staring at. If it's bright light, you find your pupil gets bigger. If it's bright light, you would find your pupil getting smaller. And if it's dim light, you would find your pupil gets bigger. And from this view, I also see there's some layer at the back of your eye. This layer is the only part of your body that is light sensitive, meaning this is the only part of your eye that can detect light. I call this part here, all over that orange or yellow part, is what I call the retina. That's the retina, and that's where you have the light receptors in your body. All right. So again, let's take like a diagram of the eye and try to identify as many things as possible from the things we've learned today. So from the front view, what do I see? I see that part in black here, that's pupil. So again, that's the pupil here. And the green part around the pupil is what I call what? I call this the iris. And again, the iris is meant for what? The iris is meant to control the size of your pupil depending on the light intensity. Times with a bright light, your pupil is going to get smaller. From this view here, I also see some other parts of the eye. I see like some part here, it's quite thick and transparent. You see that front part here? That's what I call the cornea. Cornea is some part that is meant to refract light. What does it mean when I'm saying refract light? To refract light means to bend those light waves and focus those light waves onto your retina. Okay? There's another part that's also meant to refract light, which is this one here. It's what I call lens. Now, both lens and cornea refract light. Both of them focus the light onto your retina, but the cornea refracts more light than the lens. So the cornea does most of the refraction. What is special about the lens? Lens basically can change its thickness. So if I'm staring at my screen now, my lens gets thicker. If I'm staring like at the sea or something distant, then my lens is going to get thinner, right? Also here, the back of your eye, you got some nerve. This nerve basically connects to your brain. So this takes all these impulses from your eye in like an electric form is going to be taken to the brain. That's why I call this nerve, I call it optic nerve. Optic nerve means that the nerve that connects your eyes to your brain, right? So again, let's take a look at the these labels. Let's try to open an eye, see all the parts of it. So I'm going to separate the different parts into sections. So look, first part here is containing what? That's the back of your eye. That's like the back of your head. You got that optic nerve I was telling you about. You got the retina here. So all of this here is actually retina. Plus, I also have two important parts of your retina. You have that part here. You see, it looks like a small dent in your retina. Do you know what I'm going to call this? I'm calling it the fovea. What's this fovea for? Fovea is the part of your eye where gives you the best image, the best vision comes with this fovea. A reason, because it's highly concentrated. It's very, very rich with light receptors. Okay, so that's what I call the fovea. Plus, there's a part of your eye that doesn't have any light receptors. We call it the blind spot, right? So again, blind spot, like if you close one eye and you focus on one word, move the book left and right. If you move the book left and right, you would notice that the word at some point disappears, right? This is where the word you're reading or you're focusing on falls on this blind spot, right? On the other hand, while I'm reading, I continuously move my head left and right because I'm trying to put the word I'm reading, I'm trying to put it onto the fovea. So again, blind spot has no light receptors, while fovea is very rich with light receptors. And both are parts of your retina, okay? If I now take the other part of the eye, let's take a look at the front part. Remember what I call this part that does most of the refraction? Is the cornea here. I also have the lens, right? See, that's the lens here. The lens itself is held by means of some fibers. You see those fibers here? Those fibers, we call them the ones responsible to hold, to hang the lens or to suspend the lens in its position. We call them the suspensory ligaments. So again, these fibers here and here, we call them suspensory ligaments. Again, these are meant to hang the lens in the air at this right position. Now, for me to change the thickness of the lens, remember the lens doesn't have like the same thickness. It can get thinner, thicker, based on what you're focusing on. Who's in charge of this? You got muscles on top. You got muscles at the bottom. We call either muscle, we call them ciliary muscles. And those ciliary muscles are the ones to control the thickness of your lens, right? The last thing I want to show you here is that you see that opening here in the front of your eye? That opening is the pupil. But here we're looking at the pupil sideways. We're looking at the pupil from this side. And here's the iris. Remember the iris, the green part or the colorful part? This is like muscles that control the size of your pupil. All right. So again, let's do this one more time. Now I want it to be done with your help. Okay. So I will call the part of the eye, and you guys need to pick what you think is the correct number. So take a look at the diagram on the left. Try to send me what you think is the correct number from the diagram. I'm looking now for fovea. Remember, fovea is like a dent in the back of your retina and is quite rich with light receptors. So fovea is what? Fovea is number 9 here. Okay? Where else do I have? I have cornea. Can you figure out like which number is cornea? Cornea is the part that is responsible for light refraction. So cornea is meant to be number 1, front of part of your eye. Okay. Now I'm looking for ciliary muscles. These are the muscles responsible for what? Responsible for changing the thickness of your lens. And these are muscles of what? These are muscles are the ones right here, top and bottom of your lens, right? Now I'm looking for the suspensory ligaments. Those are the ones that hold the lens. Those are the ones that connect the muscles on top to the lens. So which number is the suspensory ligaments? So that would be number, right? Number 8. Finally, before it's still early, iris is what? Which number looks like the hole for the light to enter? So there's an opening to let the light enter. And that must be what? That must be number 2 here. Lens is easy, right? Lens is just number 4. That's the lens. Retina, it's like that layer that is light sensitive, right? Sorry, iris is number 3 here, and pupil is number 2, right? Retina is 5 here, and blind spot, it's going to be number 10, right? Blind spot is number 10 here. Finally, optic nerve is 6. Is it clear? Do you have any question? All right. So let's do this one more time. If you take a look at the iris, iris is B. Iris is like muscles controlling the size of your lens, right? So that is B here. Then I have the lens itself, and the lens is C, right? In addition, I have like optic nerve. Optic nerve is F. Retina is like the back of your eye, E. And cornea is like the what am I gonna say? I'm gonna say like the most advanced or the outermost layer of your eye. So that's gonna be the cornea. Finally, ciliary muscles are here, right? Is it clear? Can someone try to match these now? Here it says allows light to enter the eye. So what label am I talking here about? It's like the only place where light can enter the eye. You try it?
Is it cornea?
No, it's like the actual hole that light can penetrate or enter the eye, right? So what am I going to call this? You try again?
Pupil?
Pupil, very good. So that is that pupil. It says carries impulses to the brain. Then what am I talking here about? It's like some part that is meant to carry impulses to the brain.
No light receptors are found here, blind spot.
All right. So no light receptors is the blind spot. And then if they carry impulses to the brain, then must be what?
Optic nerve.
Optic nerve, right? And there it says light receptors are actually found here. So what am I talking here about? That's like the entire layer where you have the light receptors. This is the what, Judy?
The retina.
Retina, right? Controls the thickness of the lens. These are like the ones that change the thickness of the lens. Here I'm talking about what? Here I'm talking about those muscles, called the ciliary muscles. Controls light that enters the eye. So what am I going to call the part to make the light, like change the size of your pupil? This is the iris, right? Finally, responsible for most of the light refraction. Most of your light refraction takes place inside that cornea, not the lens, it's the cornea, all right? Is this clear? Okay, so let's try this one last time. So that's the eye, and I'm gonna check the different functions of those different labels. So again, allows light in, that must be what? The one that allows the light in is the pupil, which is C, okay? And let me write the letters next to it, makes it neater. So that's C, and controls the size of the pupil. That would be the iris, which is, it carries impulses all the way to your brain. That must be J, that's the optic nerve, and could get thicker, thinner. You know what I'm talking here about? I am actually talking about the lens, which is what? Which is the, holds the lens in its position. That's the ligaments, right? They are holding the lens, and that is letter F, right? Provides a lot of light refraction. Here I'm talking about the cornea, and the cornea in this diagram is letter A. High density of light receptors, the highest density of light receptors I have in the fovea. And fovea is eye. Usually fovea is like the center of your retina, like right behind your pupil. Notice? So here it is. It's like horizontal line from your pupil, you find that fovea. No light receptors, that must be what? That must be the blind spot. The blind spot is K. All right? Is it clear? What is B? They're asking me what B is. These are the ciliary muscles. B is ciliary muscles, okay? Now, we look at some reflexes that you do with your eye. Your eye does two important reflexes. One is the one in response to light and dark. We call that reflex, we call the pupil reflex. Again, if you're somewhere where it's bright light, you find that pupil is small. So right now, if I see someone's pupil is tiny, this means he's in the bright light. But look, as he moves to somewhere where it's dark, you'll find what? You find that the pupil starts to get bigger, right? Why is the pupil getting bigger? Because this person needs to see in the dark. And the best way to see in the dark is to have a larger pupil. So more light will enter your eye, right? Now, when he goes back in the light again, obviously the pupil is going to get smaller, right? So one more time, the size of your pupil is controlled by muscles in the iris. So where's the iris here in this diagram? The iris is like the purple part here. And again, your iris is composed of two types of muscles. You got muscles that are like in circles. We call them simply circular muscles. And you have muscles that look like this. They radiate from the center. We call them radial muscles. And those muscles work in opposite way. So meaning now this guy is in the light. While being in the light, those circular muscles, you know what they're going to do? They're going to squeeze the pupil in the middle, making it as small as possible. If he goes to the dark, those circular muscles are going to relax. So right now, if you're in the dark, then your circular muscles will relax. But who's going to make that pupil big? The pupil gets bigger because those radial muscles do what? Those radial muscles basically contract every time you're in the dark, and they pull the pupil from the sides and make it bigger, right? What if you're in the light? Then the radial muscles will relax as you're in the light. So again, one more time. In the dark, radial muscles contract, make your pupil as big as possible. In the light, they relax and they make your pupil as small as possible. Opposite applies to what? Circular muscles. Circular muscles, when it's dark, they relax. When the light, they contract, right? So that's how those radial circular muscles work in opposite manner. So one more time, if you're somewhere where it's bright light, circular muscles contract, radial muscles relax, okay? If you are somewhere where it's dark, there's gonna be the complete opposite. You see here, pupil gets wider because the circular now, they're relaxed, and the radial are contracting. Is this clear? So let's try something. Let's try to figure out like the type of muscles that we're talking about, whether if it's in the dark or whether if it's in the light. So let's try this. If it says radial muscles contracting, is this sounds like dark or light to you? Again, radial muscles are contracting. Is this dark or is it light? Usually the radials would contract every time it's in the dark, right? So I'm just gonna put this in the dark. My second one is like this. It says circular muscles contract. Is this light or dark if the circular muscles this time are contracting? Circular muscles contract if you are in the light. Okay. Next one says that the radial muscles relaxed. When will the radial muscles relax? Radial muscles relax whenever you are in the radial muscles will relax if you are actually sitting somewhere and it's bright light. Okay. So I'm just going to put it here, bright light. Finally, it says here that circular muscles relax. Circular muscles will relax if you are somewhere in the dark. Okay. Is this clear? All right, I want to do something. I want to build like a reflex arc around those pupil reflexes. Again, I'm going to start with the stimulus. What's my stimulus in this case? The stimulus is light, okay? I need a receptor. Usually you have two types of receptors in your retina. One of these, we call them like the rods. Looks like this. This is found in your retina, and it's meant to receive light, okay? So that's the one that receives light. Is going to take this impulse to some sensory neuron. So again, that's the light receptor, and that's sensory neuron here. And then I will take this where I'll take it to the brain. Why the brain is here responsible for this reflex action? That's because your brain is like what? The brain is closer to your eyes, so it's easier or faster to do the reflex in your brain. Inside your brain, you got some relay neurons like this with synapse. See, I'm leaving a synapse here. It's like everywhere in your nervous system. And then you're going to take that to some motor here. Then you will end up with the effector. In my case, the effector is going to be where? The effector is going to be the iris muscles, the circular muscles, right? So again, that's relay here, right? And that is motor. And finally, effector, which is what? Which is the iris muscles. Is this clear? All right. Right. Now, let's try this. Let's try to figure out if am I talking about light or am I talking here about dark? Okay, so let's try this. Pupil is wider. Where would you expect the pupil to get wider? Is this dark or light? What do you think?
Dark.
Dark, right? Detected in the retina. Now, whether it's pupil is wider, pupil is darker, your receptors are always in the retina. So again, dark means not like pitch dark. No, it's just like you have some dim light here, right? So both is going to be detected in retina. When will radial muscles relax? Radial muscles contract when your pupil is wide, right? And they relax in the light. Through optic nerve, whether it's in the light, whether in the dark, you're going to carry impulses to your brain through the optic nerve. So I'm just going to keep it in the middle, okay? Circular muscles contract, that's in the light. Radial muscles contract, that's in the dark, right? Allows more light to enter. That would occur if you are trying to make your pupil as big as possible. So that's in the dark. Prevent damage to retina. You make your pupil as small as possible in bright light because you're trying to prevent any damage to your retina. All right? Is this clear? So this is my one. This is my first type of reflexes. That's the pupil reflex. I have another reflex. We call that second reflex. We call it accommodation. Why is this called accommodation? Because here we're talking about like the way we try to fit the image at the right position. Look, if you're reading something, the picture of the newspaper must fall on your retina. Who's responsible for this? It's like those muscles, ciliary muscles, they do what? They make their lens thicker so that the image would fall at the right position. They would fall right on the retina, right? So again, if I'm looking at something focused, I'm focusing on something close, you'll find that those muscles, we call them the ciliary muscles. Those ciliary muscles do what? Those ciliary muscles contract. They move from top to bottom. They do like this, and they squeeze the lens in the middle. They make the lens thicker, right? Now, what if I'm staring at something distant? If I'm looking at something distant, you find that those muscles start to move away from one another. And as they move away from one another, the lens is going to be stretched. It's going to be pulled from either way. And that will make it thinner, right? Meanwhile, you have to also to consider what? You have to consider those ligaments. So you have, those are the ciliary muscles. Just going to write their names here. Ciliary muscles. Those ciliary muscles would be the ones that move the up and down. So like this guy is looking at the distant object. Those would relax and they move up and down like this, right? Pulling the lens, making it as thin as possible. Meanwhile, do you see those ligaments here? If you're pulling your lens from both sides, your ligaments going to be stretched, right? So you find that those suspensory ligaments are actually getting stretched. But what if he decided now to do what? What if he decided to look at his phone close to his eye? This time, what's going to happen? This time, you would find what? You would find that the ciliary muscles contract. And while they contract, they will squeeze the lens in the middle. And they're going to make that lens start to get thicker. So you get more light refraction. Now, whether I'm making the lens thicker, thinner, either way, we call this what? We call this accommodation. Again, what is meant by accommodation? It's like a reflex that is meant for what? Meant to focus the light on your retina by making the lens thinner or thicker. Okay? Can we try this? This guy here is doing what? He's focusing on a close object. So I'm going to try to do what? I'm going to try to find what are the things that he must do to change the, to focus the light onto his retina. So again, first thing is going to happen here is that the ciliary muscle. If you're staring for too long on a close object, that will actually tire your eye. Reason, because those ciliary muscles will contract. Meanwhile, those suspensory ligaments, they will actually loosen. They will become like slacken. Slacken means they become loose, right? The lens this time is going to be what? The lens is squeezed from both sides and is going to get thicker, right? Light refraction, if your lens is thicker, you're going to get more light refraction this time. And this means what? This means you focus that image onto the retina, okay? So the image is falling right here onto your retina. What about the other way around? Like he's looking down some distant object. Ciliary muscles this time going to do what? Ciliary muscles going to relax. Suspensory ligaments, they'll become like stretched or tight. The lens is going to get what? The lens is going to get thinner. There'll be less refraction now. Again, this is meant to accommodate the image right at the back of your eye. Okay? Is this clear? Let's make a quick comparison between the pupil reflex, the one about light and dark, with accommodation, which is the one about what? With about the distance. Again, the pupil reflex is meant to change the size of your pupil. Accommodation is meant to change the thickness of your lens. Okay? So again, the one to focus is what? The one to focus is accommodation, right? Either reflex is done in the same way. Remember the way we did that reflex arc here? We did it with receptors in the retina. Now, this applies both for accommodation. It also applies to the pupil reflex. Okay? So I'm going to take this into, keep it both here. Involves optic nerve. Again, it's the same thing. The one meant to change the pupil size, that's simply called pupil reflex. Coordinated in the brain, which one you coordinate? It's both, right? Both reflexes coordinate in your brain. Change the thickness of your lens, that's accommodation. Ciliary muscles are your effectors in accommodation. Circular radial is for the pupil, right? Is this clear? I have a question about this. Look what it says. They gave me like some eye, and they said name part of the eye that alters the direction of light rays. They said lens does alter the light waves, but what else is responsible for? Again, that's meant refraction. Refraction is done by your lens, but it's also done by what? It's also done by your cornea. Part of the eye where light rays form an image. So that means what? They're talking here, like general part, talking about the retina, not only the fovea, because the entire retina does produce an image, right? Okay. The next bit here, they gave me a diagram. This diagram is like about what? This diagram is about somebody's trying to focus like at something distant, so like something 10 meters away, and reading from a book. And here I have the lens. At some point, the lens is getting thicker. at some point is getting thinner. So again, when it says more convex, that's the lens getting thicker. Less convex is thinner, right? So again, on the diagram, they want me to put letter D as he's focusing at something distant. So again, I just need to take a look at the diagram. Right here and right here is where his lens is thinner. So that's why I'm going to put what? I'm going to put D and D, right? Again, if your lens is thin, this means you're looking somewhere distant, okay? Yeah, both parts must be included. What about here? This is on the diagram, how the ciliary muscles, suspensory ligament act to change the thickness of your lens. Again, part E, you see part E, he's getting his lens thicker, right? So what's happening to the ciliary muscles? Ciliary muscles now are actually getting like contracting, right? And when the ciliary muscles contract, the ligaments will become loose, right? Ligaments will become loosened or slackened. Okay. The last bit of the lesson here is about your retina. So we're gonna take a look inside your eye, and we see that your retina looks something like this. Your retina looks something like what I see here. Do you see what I see? I see like two sections here. There's one where all the nerves, all the like sensory neurons are getting to. This part here is what I call the blind spot. So again, blind spot is that part where the optic nerve enters your eye. There's no light receptors there. There's also another part here. That's where you have most of your light receptors. And that's what I call what? That's what I call fovea, right? So we need to find like what are the types of receptors you have in fovea and what are the types of receptors you find everywhere in your eye. So again, I'm just gonna represent the retina something like this with fovea and blind spot, okay? And I want to show you like the types of receptors you have there. Again, most fovea, like fovea is highly rich with some light receptors. We call them the cones. They look like this. And why we call them cones? Because that's their shape. And those cones come in three types. You have cones that are red, blue, and green. These are like the primary colors, meaning that if I'm looking at something purple, then I'll be using the red and the blue. All right, so again, those cones, they're quite helpful to distinguish between colors. And they only work if it's bright light. So again, you can mix and match different colors with your cones, and that will help you for what? That will help you to determine the type of color that you see. Again, those cones only function in the bright light. They don't function in the dark. So that's why if I am somewhere dark, I wouldn't be able to see colors in the dark because my cones only work if it's bright light. Okay? Again, where are these found? These are central mostly in fovea. So fovea is highly, highly rich with those cones. And those are the ones that give you the best vision. Okay? What else do I have? Everywhere else in the eye, excluding the blind spot, so if like everywhere except the blind spot, you have another type of receptors. Other than those cones, we have something called rods. Rods, like the very, very, so many of them. And again, they're found everywhere, with the exception of fovea and with the exception of the blind spots. Cones are the ones that help you to see in the dark. Cones are sensitive to very minimum amount of light. So if you're in the dark and there's very, very little light there, you'll only be using what? You'll only be using your rods, okay? And again, the rods and cones are distributed in different ways. Here, let me show you how they're distributed. So again, this is the retina, and I want to show two positions here. I'm going to show you the fovea here, F for fovea, and B for blind spots. And I want to plot two graphs here. I'm going to plot a graph first of the rods, and I'm going to plot a graph then again for cones. So again, for rods, I'm just going to show them found everywhere. They're less in fovea, and they're none in the blind spots, okay? So this is for rods, okay? This is their number in the retina. What about cones? Cones are like different distribution. There are very, very few of them everywhere in your eye. except in fovea, there's a lot of them. And again, when I get to the blind spot, I get none of them. All right. So again, this is how rods and cones are distributed in your eye. And again, each has a different job. One for bright light, colors, and one for dim light. Okay. Someone's asking me about other animals. We only study in this subject, we only study the eye of a human. So we're not really concerned about dogs or cats or anything else. Okay, so let's try to differentiate between cones and rods. Which one gives you better image? Cones give you way better image. Rods give you poor vision. One type is rods, most in fovea, that's cones. In large numbers, these are what? Rods. Rods are way more than cones. Both are found in the retina. The ones sensitive to light are both, but the one that is more sensitive to light is rods. Again, rods can detect very, very little light. To distinguish between colors, you would need your cones. The ones linked to optic nerve are both, right? Sensitive to bright light, cones convert light into electrical impulses. That's the job of all of those receptors, right? So again, the job of receptors is like there are energy transducers, means they convert one form of energy to another. In the eye, you're meant to convert light to electricity. All right, is that clear? Let's try a question about rods and cones. It says, outline how humans are able to see colors. So what am I supposed to start with here? I'll start like this. I say, are light receptors responsible for color vision? Do you remember what one of these light receptors am I talking here about? I'm talking now about the cones. How many types of cones you got? You got 3. You have the ones for red, you have the one for green, and you have the one for blue, the primary colors. Either one of them, they're meant for what? They're meant to convert light energy into what? You convert one form of energy to light. In this case, we're going to convert it to, what do you call it? Electrical. Travels along what? How is this going to get to your brain? How you see the colors in your brain? You're going to carry this by means of your optic nerve. Once they get to the optic nerve, then your brain is going to interpret. The brain will just analyze that impulses and turn it into an image. Okay? So you actually see with your brain. Your eyes are just to detect the light, send impulses to your brain, and then the brain will convert that these electrical impulses into an image. All right? I'm going to stop here. I'm going to solve questions about this topic tomorrow, right? So now I'm just going to let you go. Unless you have a question, just stay after class.
Goodbye, Mr.
Goodbye, bye.